Hey Bio20s, I'm here today to extinguish any doubts you may have about factors affecting terrestrial ecosystems. So let's get going. Last lesson we talked about biomes, some examples of biomes here in Alberta and Canada, and we also discussed that there are various types of ecosystems within those biomes. Some can be on land, terrestrial, and some can be aquatic as well. So we're going to focus mostly on the terrestrial ecosystems today. So these would be our land ecosystems. So these are some factors that will impact what species you can have in various ecosystems, such as the muskeg, the deciduous forest, or the grasslands. First one is, of course, soil. Soil is very, very important. This is essential to growing certain plants. Some plants like a very sandy soil, some like acidic, some like a high rich nutrient soil, it varies plant to plant. So for example, the taiga has really well drained soil, whereas the muskeg has poor drainage and less oxygen. Also, the pH is far more acidic in the muskeg, so this will impact what plants we'll find there. The type of rock that the soil is formed from can also impact the pH, and humans, as we know, can impact the acidity of a soil through things like acid rain. So when we look at the soil, we're going to go layer by layer and kind of show you that it's not just dirt. There's actually different layers to soil. So the top layer is called the litter. So it's the upper layer of compost and decaying kind of leafy matter, plant matter. So it's this top layer, this litter, it's partially decomposing organic matter. Below that is the topsoil. So we're going to have small particles of rock mixed with humus. So we're going to have a little mix of rock as well as the decomposing materials, some nutrients in there like nitrogen and phosphorus. We're going to have the litter layer and the topsoil layer. We're also going to find little spaces or little pockets where oxygen and water can be found within the topsoil. Now, humus, humus, different things. Humus is made from chickpeas and you might dip vegetables into it. I don't think you want to dip vegetables into topsoil or humus anytime soon. Below the topsoil, we're going to have the subsoil. This is a little bit more rock, a little less humus, and if you dig down there, it's going to be a little lighter in color. So we got our litter, topsoil, subsoil, and then you're going to hit the bedrock, which essentially marks the end of soil, and it's a layer of solid rock. So we essentially have a layer of solid rock, then the subsoil, the topsoil, and then the litter. So we have different layers of soil containing more rock, less rock, more minerals, less minerals, things like that. So of course soil will have different characteristics affecting what plants and animals you can have in that region. Water is also very important, the available water. We get most water obviously through precipitation, and then it's retained in the soil, although some is then percolated to the groundwater in our water table. So can the plant get to the water? Is that water available to the plant in the groundwater? Do we have available water in lakes, streams, rivers, etc.? So how much water is available in the ecosystem is huge. Also, how much precipitation you get is very, very important. The grasslands, not a lot of precipitation as opposed to the taiga ecosystem. Temperature is obviously a very big factor here. So some regions are very, very warm, some regions are very, very cool, some regions are nice in the middle, and it will impact what species you can have there. So coniferous trees, for example, are adapted to short growing seasons because they keep their needles year round. So instead of having to regrow them every year, they just keep them throughout the winter. Some grasses are more adapted to warmer temperatures. So most of their biomass is underground, so that even though the top half might wither, die due to droughts and things like that, the underneath portion will be able to survive and grow next season. So various kind of adaptations that plants can make based on the ecosystem's temperature. Sunlight is of course very important. One, it affects the temperature, and two, it can affect plant growth. So a decrease in sunlight can impact plant growth, so too can an increase in sunlight. And available sunlight as well. So if you have these big, tall, evergreen trees blocking out all the sun, if you're a little tiny shrub on the forest floor, you better be okay with shade because you're probably not going to get a lot of sunlight being below those big, tall trees. If you're in an open prairie, you're probably going to get a lot of sunlight, so you need to be adapted to that. Now, there can be things that change terrestrial ecosystems. One of the biggest factors or agents of change is fire and humans, right? So forestry practices and then fire as well. So in terms of forestry practices, roughly a third, 33% of the Earth's forests have been cleared. So we've cleared forests for obviously a variety of reasons, mostly lumber, for space, things like that. And forests are really important because they recycle water, they recycle carbon dioxide, they control runoff, and most importantly, they're shelter and habitats for wildlife. So when we clear them for things like golf courses and malls, and we clear them for wood and lumber, we are taking away that ecosystem. We are changing that ecosystem. Another way ecosystems can change is through fire, whether they are intentional or not. There are these things called prescribed burns because, as it turns out, fire is actually beneficial for an ecosystem. When fire goes through an ecosystem, it burns away kind of the dead and the decaying trees that would take years and years, thousands of years to break down. And now all those nutrients are returned back to the soil. It's basically like pressing a restart on an ecosystem. Now, fire can often be dangerous if it's out of control, so we need to watch that, of course, right? Uncontrolled fires are not something that we want. But a prescribed burn is where you would go in intentionally, burn down some of the dead and the decaying matter, and then restart and replenish that nutrients or those ecosystems and those nutrients there. Some species are even adapted to fire. So some species will actually be able to, you've probably seen pine cones, right? When fire occurs, those pine cones are heat resistant, they're protected. And then when it reaches a certain temperature, they open up, releasing seeds into the newly nutrient-rich soil, allowing those trees to take over that ecosystem. So fire as a factor of change, it's a good thing for replenishing nutrients. However, uncontrolled fire can obviously destroy ecosystems if it's not maintained in these prescribed manners. And they have very specific restrictions, like you can only burn them in certain areas, wind can't be a factor, you need to make sure it's not too dry, so all of these things you need to take into consideration. So that's all I have for you today. Next lesson, we're going to look at factors that affect aquatic ecosystems, very similar to terrestrial, although there are some factors that differ between the terrestrial and the aquatic ecosystems. So thanks again for watching. We'll chat soon.